3 numbers. That was all it took to destroy a 20-year reputation. The board of directors at Sterling Dynamics was screaming for blood. The stock price was free-falling, and Silas Sterling, the man who supposedly had the Midas touch, was staring at a bankruptcy filing that would ruin him. He thought the solution lay in the hands of his Ivy League engineers or his $10,000 an hour consultants. He was wrong. The answer wasn't in the boardroom. It was written in red Sharpie on a stained napkin, left by a waitress he hadn't even looked in the eye. When he finally realized who she was, it was already too late to just hire her. He had to beg. The lobby of the Argent Tower in downtown San Francisco smelled like ambition and burnt roast. This was the headquarters of Sterling Dynamics, the crown jewel of Silicon Valley's defense and robotics sector. At the center of the marble atrium sat The Grind, a high-end coffee bar where Mina Caldwell spent 9 hours a day making oat milk lattes for people who made more in a minute than she made in a month. Mina wiped the counter, her hands red and chapped from the sanitizer. At 24, she wasn't supposed to be here. 3 years ago, she had been the youngest doctoral candidate in the erratic, high-stakes world of predictive algorithmic modeling at Caltech. She was published, she was courted by Google and DARPA. Then the car accident happened. Her parents were gone in a flash of headlights and screeching tires, leaving behind a paralyzed younger brother, Leo, and a mountain of medical debt that swallowed her scholarship, her savings, and her future. Now she wasn't the prodigy. She was just, "Hey you," or "Sweetheart," or "Can I get extra foam?" She was part of the furniture. "Mina! Table 4 needs clearing. Sterling is coming down," Rick, the floor manager, hissed. Rick was a man whose power trip was limited to the square footage of a coffee shop. He treated the arrival of Silas Sterling like the second coming of Christ. "I'm on it," Mina said, her voice low. She moved to the large corner booth, the one permanently reserved for the CEO. A few seconds later, the elevator banks chimed, and the lobby went quiet. Silas Sterling walked in. He was 32, sharply dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit, but he looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His eyes were bloodshot, his tie loosened. Flanking him was Gavin Roach, the vice president of engineering, a man who wore expensive glasses to look smart but relied on bullying to stay employed. Mina stepped back, clutching her tray against her apron, making herself invisible. It was a survival mechanism. "I don't want to hear excuses, Gavin," Silas was saying, his voice a low, dangerous rumble as they sat down. "We have the demo for the Department of Defense in 48 hours. If the guidance system lags again, we lose the contract. If we lose the contract, the company goes under. It's that simple." "It's the hardware, Silas," Gavin argued, sweating. "The processors can't handle the real-time thermal mapping. We need more time to upgrade the chips." "We don't have time. We have 48 hours." Silas slammed his hand on the table. The sound echoed through the cafe. Every customer looked up, then quickly looked down. Mina approached cautiously. "Black coffee, no sugar, and a green tea," she whispered, placing the cups down. Silas didn't look at her. He didn't even nod. He was staring at a sprawling schematic spread out on the table. It was a flow chart of the drone's logic gate processing. To anyone else, it looked like a mess of lines and Greek symbols. To Mina, it looked like a sentence with a grammatical error. She froze. Her eyes darted across the paper. It wasn't the hardware. Gavin was wrong. The processors were fine. The bottleneck was in the recursive loop of the sensor data. They were routing the thermal imaging through the central CPU instead of the localized GPU clusters. It was creating a 0.4-second latency. In drone warfare, 0.4 seconds was the difference between a successful strike and a friendly fire incident. "Can I get you anything else?" Mina asked, lingering a second too long. "Space," Silas snapped, not looking up. "I need space to think." "Right, sorry." Mina retreated. Back at the counter, Rick grabbed her arm. "Don't hover. You look desperate. Just clean the espresso machine." Mina tried to focus on the steam wand, but her mind was racing. "It's the loop. It's the code, not the chip. She could fix it. She could save them millions of dollars with 6 lines of code. But who would listen? She was just the coffee girl. For the next hour, she watched Silas and Gavin argue. The tension at table 4 was palpable. Gavin was throwing around buzzwords, trying to confuse Silas, covering up his own team's incompetence. Silas looked defeated. He rubbed his temples, his posture collapsing. He looked like a man watching his life's work burn to the ground. Finally, Silas's phone rang. "I have to take this. It's the investors from New York," he muttered. He stood up and walked toward the revolving doors for better reception. Gavin let out a huff of air, checked his Rolex, and stood up as well. "I'm going to the restroom. Don't touch anything," he sneered at the empty air, then marched off towards the back. The table was empty. The schematics were left unguarded. Mina looked around. Rick was in the back office counting inventory. The cafe was relatively empty. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She shouldn't. If she got caught touching a customer's property, specifically Silas Sterling's property, she'd be fired. If she lost this job, she couldn't pay for Leo's physical therapy next week. "Walk away, Mina," she told herself. But the error on the page was screaming at her. It was so elegant, yet so wrong. It was like seeing a piano with a missing key. She grabbed a red marker from her apron pocket, usually used for writing names on cups, and walked over to the table. She didn't touch the official blueprints. Instead, she grabbed a paper napkin that Gavin had used to scribble some rough calculations. With a trembling hand, she crossed out Gavin's entire equation. Next to it, she wrote, "Problem is logical, not physical. Bypass central CPU for thermal rendering. Use distributed processing." Then she wrote a quick, complex differential equation that proved the latency would drop to 0.02 seconds. She heard the toilet flush in the distance. Gavin was coming back. She dropped the pen, placed the napkin prominently on top of the blueprints, and sprinted back to the counter just as the restroom door swung open. Gavin returned to the table looking annoyed. He didn't notice the napkin at first. He sat down, scrolling through his phone, waiting for the boss to return. A moment later, Silas walked back in from the lobby. He looked paler than before. The call with the investors hadn't gone well. "They're pulling the funding if the demo fails, Gavin," Silas said quietly, sitting down. "We are on the edge of a cliff." "We'll figure it out, Silas. I just need you to authorize the budget for the new chips," Gavin pressed. Silas looked down at the table, reaching for his cold coffee. Then he stopped. His eyes landed on the napkin. The stark red ink stood out against the white paper and the blue blueprints. "What is this?" Silas asked, picking it up. Gavin squinted. "Trash? I didn't write that." Silas didn't answer. He was reading the equation. He wasn't an engineer by trade. He was a visionary, a product guy. But he knew enough math to recognize the structure. He followed the logic. It was radical. It contradicted everything his engineering team had told him for 3 months. It suggested that their entire architecture was built on a false premise. "Bypass the CPU," Silas mumbled. He pulled out his tablet and opened the simulation app. He punched in the variables written on the napkin. "Silas, don't waste time on scribbles," Gavin scoffed. "Probably some intern trying to be cute." "Shut up," Silas murmured. He hit Run Simulation. Usually the simulation took 10 seconds to show a failure. The progress bar loaded. 20%. 50%. 90%. Success. Latency. 0.018 seconds. Silas dropped the tablet on the table with a clatter. The noise was loud enough that Mina, scrubbing the counter 10 feet away, flinched. "It works," Silas whispered. He looked up, his eyes wide, scanning the room with a terrifying intensity. "Who wrote this?" Gavin looked at the tablet, his face draining of color. That's impossible. That's a fluke." "It's not a fluke, Gavin. It's the answer. We've been burning cash on hardware when the code was the problem." Silas stood up, holding the napkin like it was the Declaration of Independence. "Who sat here? Who came to this table?" Gavin looked around, panicked. He needed a scapegoat or a distraction. I went to the restroom. No one was here." Silas turned towards the counter. He saw Rick coming out of the back office. "You!" Silas shouted. Rick jumped, nearly dropping a crate of almond milk. He rushed over, wiping his hands nervously. "Mr. Sterling, is everything okay? Is the coffee cold? I can—" "Who touched this table?" Silas demanded, holding up the napkin. Rick looked at the napkin, then at the terrified look on Gavin's face. He assumed the worst. He assumed someone had defaced the CEO's documents. He looked around and saw Mina standing by the espresso machine, her face pale. "Mina!" Rick barked. "Get over here!" Mina walked over, her legs feeling like lead. This was it. She was going to be fired. She kept her head down. "Did you touch this table?" Rick accused, his voice rising to perform for the billionaire. "I told you to clear the cups, not mess with the gentleman's papers." Mina started, her voice shaking. She was hovering earlier," Gavin interjected, seizing the opportunity to discredit whatever was on that napkin. "She probably spilled something and tried to cover it up with nonsense graffiti." "I am so sorry, Mr. Sterling," Rick said, bowing slightly. "She's new. She's not very bright. I'll handle this immediately." He turned to Mina, his face twisting into a scowl. "Pack your things. You're done. Get out." Mina felt the tears prick her eyes. It wasn't the insult to her intelligence that hurt. She was used to that. It was the fear of the unpaid medical bills. "Please," she whispered, "I really need this job. Out!" Rick pointed to the door. Silas had been watching the exchange silently. He looked at the girl. She was wearing a stained apron, her hair in a messy bun, looking at the floor in defeat. She looked nothing like the kind of person who could solve a differential equation that stumped 20 PhDs. He looked back at the napkin. The handwriting was sharp, confident. The red marker matched the one sticking out of her apron pocket. "Wait," Silas said. The command was soft but absolute. Rick froze. "Sir?" Silas ignored him. He took a step toward Mina. He towered over her. "Look at me." Mina slowly lifted her chin. Her eyes were hazel, intelligent, and currently filled with terror. "Did you write this?" Silas asked, holding up the napkin. Mina hesitated. If she admitted it, would she be sued for corporate espionage? But she had nothing left to lose. She had already been fired. "Yes," she said, her voice steadying slightly. "I wrote it." "Why?" "Because you were looking for the bottleneck in the wrong place," she said, the technical confidence suddenly overriding her fear. "Your thermal sensors operate on a high-frequency polling rate. If you funnel that through a general-purpose CPU, you create a queue. It's like trying to push a swimming pool through a garden hose. The math on the napkin fixes the flow." Silence. Absolute silence in the cafe. Gavin laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Listen to her, Silas. She's talking about polling rates. She probably read a Wired article once. She's a waitress." Silas didn't look at Gavin. He didn't blink. He was studying Mina as if she were a newly discovered element on the periodic table. "You're fired," Silas said. Mina's shoulders slumped. "I know." Rick just said, "No," Silas cut her off. "I mean, you're fired from this coffee shop." He turned to Rick. "She doesn't work for you anymore." Then he turned back to Mina. "Grab your coat. You're coming upstairs." "Excuse me?" Mina blinked. "We have 48 hours to rewrite the guidance system code based on your math," Silas said, checking his watch. "If you're right, I'll pay you double whatever you make here in a year for 2 days of work. If you're wrong, well, then you can come back and ask Rick for your apron." "Silas!" Gavin protested, his face turning purple. "You cannot be serious. You're bringing a barista into the secure R&D lab. This is a security violation. This is insanity." Silas turned to Gavin, his eyes cold as ice. "No, Gavin. Insanity is paying you $500,000 a year to miss a problem that a barista solved in 30 seconds while steaming milk. Now get the elevator." Silas looked at Mina, extending a hand. "Coming?" Mina looked at Rick, whose jaw was practically on the floor. She looked at the dirty rag in her hand. She dropped the rag on the counter. "Yes," Mina said. "I'm coming." As the elevator doors closed on Mina, Silas, and a fuming Gavin, the people in the coffee shop were left in stunned silence. But for Mina, the real danger was just beginning. She had just stepped out of obscurity and into the shark tank, and she had no idea that Gavin Roach was already plotting how to destroy her before the 48 hours were up. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor took exactly 18 seconds, but for Mina, it felt like a lifetime. The polished steel doors reflected 3 distinct figures: Silas Sterling, staring straight ahead with the intensity of a man walking into a burning building; Gavin Roach, whose reflection seemed to vibrate with suppressed rage; and Mina, clutching her stained apron like a security blanket, smelling faintly of roasted coffee beans and fear. When the doors slid open, they didn't step into an office. They stepped into the Nexus. It was a cavernous, glass-walled laboratory that looked more like a spaceship bridge than a workplace. Rows of curved monitors glowed with cascading code. In the center of the room, suspended on a gyroscopic mount, was the Sterling X-1, a drone the size of a hawk, sleek, matte black, and currently the most expensive paperweight in California. A dozen engineers looked up. They were men and women in hoodies and expensive sneakers, the elite of Silicon Valley. They stopped typing. The silence was absolute. "Everyone, listen up," Silas announced, his voice carrying without effort. "We are scraping the current thermal rendering architecture. It's garbage." A murmur of confusion rippled through the room. But Silas, a lead engineer named Brad, spoke up, spinning in his Herman Miller chair. "We've spent 6 months on that architecture. If we scrap it now, we miss the DoD window." "We miss the window if the drone crashes, Brad," Silas countered. He stepped aside, revealing Mina. "This is—" Silas paused. He realized he didn't even know her last name. "Mina," she whispered. "This is Mina," Silas continued. "She's going to fix the latency issue." Brad looked at Mina. He looked at her worn-out sneakers, her messy bun, and the coffee stain on her jeans. He looked at Gavin, bewildered. The girl from the coffee shop downstairs. The one who messed up my oat milk order yesterday?" A few stifled laughs broke out. Gavin smirked, crossing his arms. "Silas has a hunch. Apparently wiping tables qualifies you for high-level systems architecture now." Mina felt the heat rise in her cheeks. This was a mistake. These people had PhDs from MIT and Stanford. She was a dropout with a mountain of debt. She turned to leave, her hand reaching for the elevator button. "Don't," Silas said softly, grabbing her wrist. His grip was warm, grounding. "Do not let them win. You wrote that equation. You know it works. Prove them wrong." He led her to a vacant terminal right next to the main server. "Log her in, Gavin," Gavin scoffed. "I'm not giving a civilian root access to our servers. Security Protocol 4A explicitly states—" "Gavin," Silas said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "log her in, or clean out your desk." Gavin's jaw tightened. He walked over, typed a password furiously, and stepped back with a mock bow. "It's all yours, genius. Don't delete the internet." Mina sat down. The chair was more comfortable than her bed at home. She looked at the screen. The code was a mess. It was spaghetti code, layers upon layers of patches, fixes, and workarounds that Gavin's team had built to hide the core inefficiencies. She took a deep breath. She cracked her knuckles. "Think of it like a game," she told herself, "just like the simulations at Caltech." She touched the keyboard. For the first 20 minutes, the room ignored her. They expected her to fail, to ask how to open a file, to give up. But Mina didn't ask anything. Her fingers flew. The clacking of her mechanical keyboard became a rapid-fire rhythm, faster than anyone else in the room. She wasn't just typing. She was conducting. She pulled up the command line, bypassing the graphical interface entirely. She brought up the kernel logs. She found the rot. "You're routing the visual data through a singular pipe," Mina mumbled to herself, her eyes darting across the streams of data. "Why would you do that? Unless you were trying to hide the processor load." She started deleting. "Whoa, whoa!" Brad shouted, standing up. "She's deleting the safety limiters. Silas, stop her!" Gavin lunged forward. "She's sabotaging the build." "Sit down!" Silas barked. He was standing behind Mina, watching the screen. He didn't understand every line, but he understood the flow. She wasn't sabotaging. She was pruning. She was cutting away the dead weight. "I need a localized compile," Mina said, her voice clear and authoritative for the first time. "I need the GPU cluster dedicated to this terminal, now." "We can't do that," Gavin spat. "It'll slow down the rest of the—" "Do it," Silas ordered. Brad hesitantly typed a command on his station. "Resource allocated." Mina hit enter. On the main screen, the simulation of the drone hovered. Usually when the thermal camera turned on, the drone stuttered. Mina's code injected itself into the mainframe. The drone in the simulation banked left, activated the thermal camera, and it didn't stutter. It accelerated. The telemetry numbers on the wall turned from red to green. Latency 0.04 S, 0.03 S, 0.015 S. The room went silent again. But this wasn't the silence of judgment. It was the silence of awe. Mina spun her chair around. She was sweating, her hair escaping her bun in wisps. She looked at Gavin. "I bypassed the central CPU," she said, her voice trembling slightly with adrenaline. "I set up a parallel processing loop. The drone doesn't need to think about the image. It just needs to react to it. It's a reflex, not a thought." Silas stared at the screen. It was cleaner, faster, and more efficient than anything his $100 million team had produced in a year. He looked down at Mina. For the first time, he didn't see a coffee girl. He saw a peer. "It works," Silas breathed. "It's a fluke," Gavin said quickly, though his voice lacked its usual venom. He looked pale. "She stripped the safety protocols. It's unstable. Put that in the air and it might crash into a school bus." "It's not unstable," Mina argued, standing up. "It's optimized. Your code was bloated because you were using third-party libraries you didn't understand." "Excuse me?" Gavin stepped into her personal space. "I have a master's from Berkeley. You pour coffee." "And I just fixed your 6-month problem in 40 minutes, Mina shot back. Silas stepped between them. "Enough. Gavin, run a full diagnostic. Mina, you're not going anywhere. We have 48 hours to refine this for the demo. If this holds up, I'm giving you a contract." "I don't need a contract," Mina said quietly, the reality of her brother's situation crashing back in. "I need cash. Tonight." Silas looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the frayed cuffs of her shirt. He saw the desperation she was trying so hard to hide. "Done," Silas said. "Check for $10,000, an advance. Tonight." Mina felt her knees go weak. 10,000. That would cover Leo's surgery. It would save everything. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet," Silas said, looking at the angry faces of his engineering team. "We still have to survive the night." It was 3 a.m. The Nexus was dim, lit only by the blue glow of monitors and the red standby light of the drone. Most of the engineers had gone home to sleep, instructed to return at 6 a.m. for the final prep. Only 3 people remained: Mina, Silas, and Gavin. Mina was slumped in her chair, staring at lines of C++ code until they blurred together. She had been coding for 14 hours straight. Her eyes burned. "Here," a voice said. She looked up. Silas was holding a bottle of water and a protein bar. He had taken off his suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves. Without the armor of his wealth, he looked younger, more human. "Thanks," she said, taking the water. Her hands shook. Silas pulled up a chair and sat backward on it, facing her. "You're not just a hobbyist, Mina. I had HR run a background check." Mina stiffened. "I didn't lie on my application. I just didn't include everything." "You were a doctoral candidate at Caltech," Silas recited, "specializing in heuristic algorithms. You dropped out 3 years ago. Why?" Mina looked away. "Life happens." "Life doesn't just happen to people like you. You don't quit unless you're forced to." Mina sighed. She was too tired to lie. "My parents died. Car crash. My brother Leo. He survived, but he needed care. Full-time care. Scholarships don't pay for neuro-rehabilitation centers. Waitressing does. Tips are cash. Cash is fast." Silas was silent. He looked at the multi-billion-dollar drone hanging in the center of the room. He thought about his own problems, stock prices, board members, yachts he didn't use. They felt suddenly, pathetically small. "I'm sorry," Silas said. "Don't be," Mina snapped, opening the protein bar. "I don't need pity. I need this code to work, so I can pay for his next round of therapy." "It will work," Silas said. "You're brilliant, Mina. Tonight proved that. After this demo, I want you to run the software division. No more coffee. No more tips." Mina looked at him. For a moment, she allowed herself to hope. A real job. A career. A life where she didn't have to count pennies at the grocery store. "I'd like that," she smiled softly. "Mr. Sterling," Gavin's voice cut through the moment like a knife. Gavin emerged from the server room in the back. He was holding a tablet. "We have a problem with the encryption key. I need you to authorize a manual override on the mainframe." Silas stood up, the moment broken. "Now? Can't it wait until morning?" "Not if we want the drone to fly," Gavin said, his eyes hidden behind the glare of his glasses. "Fine." Silas turned to Mina. "Take a break. Close your eyes for 20 minutes. You've earned it." Silas followed Gavin into the secure server room at the back of the lab. Mina was alone. The hum of the servers was hypnotic. She leaned back, closing her eyes. Just for a second. She drifted off. Click. The sound was soft, like a keyboard key being pressed gently. Mina's eyes snapped open. She checked her watch. 10 minutes had passed. She looked around. The room was empty. Silas and Gavin were still in the back. She sat up and wiggled her mouse to wake the screen. A red dialog box was blinking in the center of her code. Compilation error. Segmentation fault. "What?" Mina whispered. No, I fixed that." She scrolled up. The code looked different. Blocks of her elegant, streamlined script had been moved, and there, buried in the middle of the sensor loop, was a new command. A command she hadn't written. It was a command to invert the gyroscope data upon thermal activation. If the drone flew with this code, the moment it turned on its heat sensors, it wouldn't just lag. It would flip upside down and slam into the ground at 200 miles per hour. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her chest. "Silas!" she yelled, jumping up. Silas ran out of the server room, Gavin close behind him. "What? What is it?" "Someone touched my terminal," Mina said, pointing at the screen. "Look, someone injected a suicide command." Silas rushed over. He looked at the code. "Invert axis. Why would you write that?" "I didn't," Mina cried. "I was asleep. I woke up and it was there." Gavin walked up slowly, shaking his head. "Silas, look at the timestamp on the edit." Silas checked the log. Last edit, 3:14 a.m. User M_Caldwell. 3:14, Gavin said smoothly. "That was 3 minutes ago. You were the only one in the room, Mina. Mr. Sterling and I were in the server room. The logs prove it." Mina stared at the screen. "No, that's impossible. I was sleeping." "Were you?" Gavin's voice turned sympathetic, sickeningly so. "Look, Silas, it's what I said. She's burnt out. She's tired. She's confused, or..." He paused for effect. "She realizes she can't actually fix the core problem, so she's planting bugs to buy more time. It's classic imposter syndrome behavior." "I am not an imposter," Mina shouted. "Someone used my terminal. Gavin, you came out here, didn't you?" "I was with the CEO," Gavin said calmly. "Are you calling Mr. Sterling a liar?" Silas looked at Mina. His face was unreadable. The trust that had been building between them was fracturing under the weight of the digital evidence. "Mina," Silas said slowly, "did you write this line?" "No. Silas, you have to believe me. This code destroys the drone. Why would I do that when I need the money?" "Maybe for leverage," Gavin suggested. "Maybe to blackmail the company. Pay me double or the drone crashes." "That's insane," Mina backed away. "The log is under your user ID, Mina," Silas said, his voice hardening. "And we were in the other room. There is no one else here. Mina looked around the room. She felt trapped. The walls of the high-tech lab felt like a prison. She had been set up. But how? Then she saw it. On the floor, near the server rack, Gavin had walked past earlier, was a small black USB drive. It was tiny, barely visible against the dark carpet. Gavin had wireless access. He didn't need to be at her keyboard. He could have run a script from his phone if he had a back door installed. "Check the background processes," Mina said, her voice shaking but determined. "If I wrote it, I typed it. If someone injected it remotely, there will be a shell command history." "We don't have time for a forensic audit," Gavin yelled. "The demo is in 24 hours. Silas, we have to revert to my old code. It's slow, but it won't crash. We have to fire her, now, before she does any more damage." Silas looked at Gavin, then at Mina. Mina held his gaze. "If you revert to his code, you lose the contract. You know that. If you trust me, I can find the footprint. I can prove someone else did this. Give me 5 minutes." "5 minutes to what? Delete the evidence?" Gavin sneered. Silas closed his eyes. He took a deep breath. He was gambling his entire company on a girl he met yesterday. He opened his eyes. 5 minutes, Silas said. "Gavin, step away from the desk." "Silas! Step away!" Silas roared. Mina sat down. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. She was angry, and anger was good fuel. She opened the command terminal. She didn't look for the code, she looked for the ghost. She typed history vertical bar grep remote. Nothing. She typed netstat an. And there it was, a tiny 4-byte packet transfer at 3:14 a.m., originating not from the keyboard, but from a local Bluetooth port. "You didn't type it," Mina said, standing up and pointing at Gavin. "You beamed it. Bluetooth injection. From your phone to the server rack." She walked over to the spot on the carpet and picked up the tiny black USB dongle she had spotted. She held it up. "A Bluetooth sniffer," she said, "plugged into the back of the server. You planted this so you could edit my code while you were standing in the other room with Silas, establishing your alibi." The color drained from Gavin's face so fast he looked like a corpse. Silas stared at the small device in Mina's hand. He turned to Gavin. The betrayal in his eyes was terrifying. "Gavin," Silas said, his voice trembling with quiet fury, "unlock your phone." "Silas, she planted that. She—" "Unlock your phone." Gavin fumbled for his phone. He dropped it. It clattered on the floor. Silas picked it up. He didn't need the password. The screen was still active. The terminal app was open. The command invert _gyro _axis was the last thing typed. Silas looked at his vice president. "Get out," Silas whispered. "Silas, please, Get out!" "Before I throw you through that window," Silas screamed, his voice echoing off the glass walls. Gavin scrambled back, grabbing his bag, and ran for the elevator. The room fell silent again. Just Mina, Silas, and the drone. Silas slumped into a chair. He put his head in his hands. He tried to destroy the company. Just to be right. "He tried to destroy me," Mina corrected gently. Silas looked up. He looked at Mina with a new expression. It wasn't just respect anymore. It was gratitude. And maybe something else. "You saved us," Silas said. "Not yet," Mina said, turning back to the screen. She highlighted the malicious code. I still have to delete this trash and recompile, and we have... She checked the clock. 4 hours until the DOD arrives. She looked at Silas. Coffee? Silas laughed, a dry, ragged sound. I'll make it, you code. The sun rose over San Francisco like a bruised peach, casting long orange shadows across the laboratory floor. The Nexus was quiet, save for the hum of the cooling fans and the rhythmic tapping of Mina's fingers. Done, Mina whispered, hitting the final compile key. She leaned back, her spine cracking audibly. The screen flashed green. Build successful. Here, Silas said, placing a cup on the desk. It was a latte, a terrible, lopsided latte, with bubbles the size of quarters, but it was hot. I tried to make a heart in the foam, Silas admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. It looks more like a kidney. Mina laughed, the sound rusty from disuse. She took a sip. It was burnt, but it was the best coffee she had ever tasted. It's perfect. Thank you. No, thank you, Silas said, sitting on the edge of the desk. He looked at the code scrolling on the screen. You know, when I started this company, I wanted to build things that saved people. Search and rescue drones, firefighting bots. Somewhere along the way, between the IPO and the board meetings, it just became about hitting quarterly targets. Watching you work tonight, it reminded me of why I loved this in the first place. The problem solving, the purity of it. Mina looked at him over the rim of the cup. For the last 4 hours, they hadn't been billionaire and waitress. They had been partners. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes, mirroring her own. It's not just code to me, Mina said softly. It's logic. Logic is fair. Life isn't fair. Money isn't fair. But if you write the syntax right, the code does exactly what it's supposed to do. It never lies to you. Silas held her gaze, a profound sadness and admiration mixing in his expression. He reached out, almost brushing a stray hair from her face, but the elevator chimed loudly. The spell broke, the doors slid open, and the noise of the world rushed in. General Armstrong, a man built like a tank with a buzz cut and a uniform decorated with enough brass to set off a metal detector, marched in. He was flanked by 3 aides and 2 grim-faced technical advisors. Behind them came the Sterling Dynamics Board of Directors, led by Archibald Thorne, a man who looked like he had been born in a tuxedo and resented every moment he wasn't drinking scotch. Sterling, General Armstrong barked, his voice echoing in the cavernous lab. I hear we're down a vice president. My team tells me Roach resigned at 4 a.m. Does that mean the project is dead in the water? Silas stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. The transformation was instant. The vulnerable man was gone. The CEO was back. Not at all, General, Silas said smoothly, walking to meet them. Mr. Roach decided to pursue other opportunities. We have upgraded the team. I'd like you to meet our lead architect for this phase, Mina Caldwell. Mina stood up. She was still wearing her jeans and the company t-shirt Silas had found for her. She looked nothing like the corporate soldiers the general was used to. Thorne, the board member, sneered. Is this a joke, Silas? She looks like she wandered in from a frat party. She's the one who fixed the latency, Archie, Silas said coldly. Watch. Silas nodded to Mina. Mina's heart hammered against her ribs. She sat at the control terminal. This was it. $10,000. Leo's surgery. Her future. Initiating startup sequence, she announced, her voice steady. The drone, the Sterling X-1, hummed to life. Its rotors spun, a blur of motion. It lifted off the mount, hovering perfectly still in the center of the room. Standard hover is easy, one of the general's aides muttered. Let's see the thermal tracking. Activate target simulation, Mina commanded. Suddenly, a series of high-speed drones, small, fast targets, zipped into the air from the side launchers. They moved erratically, simulating enemy combatants in an urban environment. Engage, Mina typed. The X-1 didn't just move, it danced. It snapped from target to target with terrifying speed. On the main screen, the thermal feed was displayed. Usually this was a blur of colors. Now it was crystal clear. Target locked. Target locked. Target locked. The latency counter in the corner of the screen held steady at 0.012 seconds. It was faster than human thought. Increase speed to Mach 0.5 equivalent, General Armstrong ordered, leaning forward. That's beyond the safety specs, Thorne warned. The processor will overheat. Do it, Silas said, his eyes on Mina. Mina ramped up the parameters. The drone whirred, a high-pitched scream of aerodynamics. It tracked the targets flawlessly. Then the simulation threw a curveball. A civilian heat signature popped up in the middle of the enemy cluster. The old code would have flagged it as a target due to the processing lag. The X-1 swerved. It avoided the civilian target by millimeters, reacquired the enemy, and simulated a neutralize command. Clean kill, the aide whispered. Zero collateral. Mina brought the drone back to a hover and gently landed it on the mount. The rotors spun down. Silence filled the room. General Armstrong turned to Silas. He didn't smile, but his eyes were gleaming. That, the general said, pointing a thick finger at the drone, is the deadliest piece of hardware I have ever seen. You have your contract, Sterling. We want 500 units by December. The room exploded. The engineers who had arrived for the morning shift cheered. Thorne looked stunned, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Silas didn't look at the general. He looked at Mina. He was grinning, a true, wide grin of victory. Mina slumped in her chair, letting out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 3 years. She had done it. She was safe. The celebration was in full swing by noon. Champagne corks were popping in the conference room. The stock price of Sterling Dynamics had jumped 18% in 2 hours. Mina stood near the window, holding a glass of sparkling water. She felt out of place among the suits and the expensive watches. She was the architect of their victory, but she was still the outsider. You're hiding, a voice said. Silas appeared beside her, holding 2 flutes of champagne. He handed her one. You earned this. Even if you don't drink it, just hold it. It scares the board members. Mina smiled weakly. I should go, Silas. I have to check on my brother. The shift nurse leaves at 1. Wait, Silas said, his expression turning serious. I meant what I said last night. I want you here, permanently. I'm firing the current CTO. The job is yours. Starting salary is $200,000 plus stock options. Mina nearly dropped her glass. 200? Is that not enough? I can go higher, Silas said quickly. No, it's life-changing, Mina stammered. Tears pricked her eyes. Silas, thank you. You have no idea what this means. I think I do, Silas said softly. He took a step closer, the air between them charged with electricity. You saved my company, Mina. You saved me. For a moment, it seemed like he was going to kiss her. The noise of the party faded away. Then the conference room doors slammed open. Archibald Thorne walked in, followed by 2 security guards and a woman in a sharp grey suit, Silas's head of human resources. They weren't smiling. Silas, Thorne boomed. We need to talk. Now. Silas frowned, stepping in front of Mina. We're celebrating, Archie. Can't this wait? No, Thorne said, slamming a file folder onto the sleek conference table. It cannot wait. It concerns your new lead architect. The room went quiet. The engineers and executives sensed blood in the water. What is this? Silas asked, his voice low. That, Thorne said, pointing a manicured finger at Mina, is a background check, a real one, not the superficial one HR ran yesterday. Silas picked up the file. Mina felt a cold knot form in her stomach. She knew what was in there. Mina Caldwell, Thorne announced to the room, his voice dripping with disdain. Former PhD candidate, yes. But let's look at the financials. $140,000 in student loan debt. Another $80,000 in medical debt. 3 months behind on rent. Her credit score is subprime." "So she has debt," Silas snapped, throwing the file down. "Most Americans do, Archie. She's brilliant. I don't care about her credit score." "You should," Thorne countered, "because she is a security risk. Do you know who she was emailing last night from our servers? She sent an encrypted packet to an external server." "That was a diagnostic!" Mina cried out, stepping forward. "I was checking the cloud latency." "Or," Thorne said, turning to the general who was watching with narrowed eyes, "she was selling the source code to the highest bidder to pay off her crippling debts. Desperate people do desperate things, Silas. And this woman is desperate." "That is a lie," Silas shouted. "She found the sabotage. Gavin was the one who—" "Gavin Roach," Thorne interrupted, "called the board this morning. He claims he was fired because he refused to sign off on her dangerous code. He claims you and this waitress are having an inappropriate relationship and that you gave her access to classified DoD material without clearance." The accusation hung in the air like toxic smoke. "That is absurd," Silas hissed. "Is it?" Thorne sneered. "She's a barista, Silas. Yesterday she was serving you coffee. Today she has root access to a weapons system. The optics are catastrophic. The shareholders will revolt." Thorne turned to the security guards. "Escort Miss Caldwell out of the building, immediately, and seize her electronics. We need to ensure she hasn't stolen proprietary data." "No!" Silas stepped forward, grabbing the guard's arm. "She stays. I am the CEO. And I am the chairman of the board," Thorne roared. "And if you don't back down, Silas, I will call for a vote of no confidence right now. Do you want to lose your company over a girl you met yesterday?" Silas froze. He looked at Mina. He looked at the company he had built from nothing. He looked at the general, who was watching him, waiting to see if Silas was a liability. Mina saw the hesitation. It broke her heart more than the accusations. She realized then that she couldn't let him choose. If he chose her, he lost everything. "It's okay," Mina whispered. Silas whipped his head around. "Mina, no." "It's okay," she said, her voice trembling but loud enough for the room to hear. "I don't want to cause trouble." She looked at Thorne. "I didn't steal anything. I fixed your machine. And I did it because I'm good at what I do, not because I'm desperate." She reached into her pocket, pulled out the check for $10,000 that Silas had written her, and placed it on the table. "I can't take this," she said to Silas, her eyes burning. "If I take it, they'll say it was a payoff." "Mina, keep the money," Silas pleaded, ignoring the board. "Please." "Goodbye, Silas," she said. She turned and walked toward the door. The security guards flanked her, treating her like a criminal. She walked past the engineers who had cheered for her 10 minutes ago. They looked at the floor, unwilling to meet her eyes. She stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, she saw Silas fighting to get past Thorne, but it was too late. Mina walked out of the Argent Tower and into the blinding afternoon sun. She was back on the street. No job, no money for Leo, and now marked as a corporate spy. She walked 2 blocks before her legs gave out. She sat on a bench, burying her face in her hands. Her phone buzzed. She ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. She pulled it out, expecting a threatening text from Gavin or a legal notice from Sterling Dynamics. It wasn't a text. It was a notification from her bank app. Deposit received, $500,000. She stared at the screen. The sender wasn't Sterling Dynamics. It wasn't Silas personally. The sender was labeled U.S. Dept of Defense, Consulting Retainer. Her phone rang. Caller ID. Unknown. Mina answered, her hand shaking. "Hello?" "Miss Caldwell," General Armstrong's voice rasped on the other end. "I don't care about board politics. I care about results, and you're the only one who knows how that bird flies." Mina sat up straighter. "General, Sterling is a good man, but he's tied up in red tape," Armstrong said. "I'm not. I need you at Andrews Air Force Base in 3 hours. We have a private jet waiting at SFO. Are you in?" Mina looked back at the Argent Tower, looming high above the skyline. She wiped her tears. "I'm in," she said. 3 days later, the boardroom of Sterling Dynamics was a shark tank. The air conditioning was set to a frigid 65 degrees, but Silas Sterling was sweating. Archibald Thorne sat at the head of the mahogany table, looking like a king on his throne. The rest of the board members avoided Silas's gaze. "The motion is on the table," Thorne announced, his voice smooth and predatory. "A vote of no confidence in Silas Sterling. Grounds: gross negligence, breach of fiduciary duty, and sharing classified data with unvetted service staff." Silas stood up, his hands flat on the table. "You're making a mistake, Archie. We have the contract. The X1 is performing beyond expectations. The X1 is a liability because you are a liability," Thorne countered. "We need stability. We need leadership that doesn't hire waitresses to run R&D. The Department of Defense will pull the contract the moment they realize how chaotic this administration is." "Actually," a booming voice came from the doorway, "the Department of Defense is quite happy." Every head in the room snapped towards the double doors. General Armstrong stood there, flanked by 2 military police officers. But it wasn't the general who made Thorne's jaw drop. It was the woman standing next to him. Mina walked in, gone were the jeans and the stained apron. She wore a tailored navy blazer, sharp trousers, and heels that clicked with authority against the floor. Her hair was down, framing a face that no longer held a trace of fear. She held a leather portfolio, not a serving tray. "Gentlemen," Mina said, her voice cool and composed. "Security," Thorne yelled, standing up. "Get this woman out of here. She is trespassing." "She is not trespassing," General Armstrong barked, stepping into the room. "She is the primary consultant for the X1 project. In fact, she is the contract holder." Silence descended on the room. Silas looked at Mina, his eyes wide with shock and hope. "What are you talking about?" Thorne demanded. Mina walked to the empty seat at the opposite end of the table, directly facing Thorne. She placed her portfolio on the table and opened it. "The code I wrote," Mina began, "uses a unique polymorphic encryption. It binds to the biometric signature of the user. When you fired me, you locked yourselves out of the update loop. The drones you have in the hangar? They're bricks. They won't fly without my authentication." She slid a document down the long table. It stopped perfectly in front of Thorne. "General Armstrong has retained me to oversee the implementation of the guidance system," Mina continued. "I don't work for Sterling Dynamics. I work for the United States government, and my first recommendation to the Pentagon is to cancel the contract with Sterling Dynamics due to—" what was the phrase? "Incompetent leadership." Thorne turned pale. "You can't do that." "I just did," Mina said. Unless what?" a board member asked nervously. "Unless Silas Sterling remains CEO," Mina said, her eyes locking with Silas's, "and unless Archibald Thorne resigns from the board, effective immediately." Thorne laughed nervously. "This is blackmail." "It's business," General Armstrong interjected. "The DoD trusts Miss Caldwell, and Miss Caldwell trusts Mr. Sterling. If you want the government's money, you play by her rules." Thorne looked around the table. He saw the shift in the room. The board members weren't loyal to him. They were loyal to profit, and Mina was the profit. "I second the motion for Thorne's resignation," the vice chairman said quietly. "I third it," another member added. Thorne slumped in his chair, defeated by the coffee girl he had tried to crush. An hour later, the boardroom was empty, except for Silas and Mina. The sun was setting, painting the San Francisco skyline in gold. Silas walked over to her. He looked exhausted, but happier than he had been in years. "You look different," he said softly. "I feel different," Mina admitted. "I paid Leo's hospital bill this morning, in full. He's scheduled for surgery on Tuesday." "Mina, Silas hesitated. He reached out and took her hand. "I should have fought harder for you 3 days ago. I let them push you out. I'm sorry." Mina squeezed his hand. You were fighting a war you couldn't win alone, Silas. That's why the code works. It's a distributed system. We work better together. Silas smiled, stepping closer. So does this mean I have to take orders from you now, since you're the government consultant? Absolutely, Mina grinned. First order, buy me a coffee, a real one, not that sludge you made in the lab. Deal, Silas whispered. He leaned in, and this time no doors burst open. He kissed her, and for Mina, it felt like the final line of code falling into place. Perfect, logical, and undeniably right. They walked out of the office together, not as billionaire and waitress, but as partners. The world had tried to tell Mina she was nothing, but she had rewritten the script. She wasn't just a coffee girl. She was the architect of her own life, and she was just getting started. And that is the story of how Mina Caldwell went from serving lattes to saving a billion-dollar empire. It's a powerful reminder that intelligence and worth aren't defined by a job title or a bank account. Mina was invisible to everyone in that room, yet she held the key to their entire future. How many of us have felt like Mina? Overlooked, underestimated, or judged by our current circumstances rather than our potential. Whether you're working a shift you hate, studying late into the night, or fighting battles no one else can see, remember this: your current chapter is not your whole story. You never know when your napkin moment will come, so stay ready. If you enjoyed this story of redemption, romance, and sweet revenge, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more stories about underdogs rising to the top, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Let me know in the comments, have you ever been underestimated by a boss or a teacher? I read every comment. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.